Hey folks, Bryce Holdaway here from the Property Couch, and I have with me a very special guest today. I've got Nerida Conisbee, who's the Chief Economist at realestate.com.au, or REA in general. But hello Nerida, how are you?
Hi, I'm well.
I'm usually sort of looking to the left here to see you, but you're obviously one of those rare spots where you don't have to travel, which is nice for you and the family. But hey, there's as we sort of run closer to the end of Christmas, I'm keen to get your insights. We just want to share with the viewers that stick around right to the very end, because we're going to go through a little bit of the property highlights to show the most clicked on listings, the most clicked on auctions and rentals, and the most expensive, which is a Gold Coast beauty. So stick around for that. But Nerida, what are your observations as we are very much in the shadows of Christmas? What are your observations of the property market at this point of the year?
Yeah, the market's certainly recovered, and we've seen in Melbourne and Sydney, or everywhere actually, a big uptick in search activity on realestate.com.au. It's most apparent in Sydney. We are seeing the biggest surges of clicks into the Sydney market at present. And then on the other side of the scale, in terms of supply, we are continuing to see very low levels of supply. So again, Sydney is the worst impacted, down 15% from the same time last year. There's only been three markets where we've seen a pickup in listings, and that's the ACT, South Australia, and also Northern Territory.
Well, it's not really going to help the Northern Territory though a lot, is it? Because they're on the wrong side of the equation. But ACT and South Australia will benefit from the extra listing activity to keep their markets a little bit more supplied, because Sydney and Melbourne are really suffering from low listing levels. And in fact, in terms of chatting with the team this morning, we missed a couple of auctions that we thought we were a shoe-in for, and stuff was going 250 over reserve, couple hundred over reserve, which is just... It's like, it sounds good for for a headline. It sounds good for the person who's selling it. I'm sure they felt like they got a little lotto win, but it's not good for the market, is it?
No, look, it is quite stressful. I mean, we are seeing some suburbs, particularly premium suburbs in Melbourne and Sydney, do incredibly well. If we have a look at the area that's seen year on year the strongest growth, it has been the northern beaches of Sydney. So that area is one of the more expensive areas of Australia, and it's doing very well in terms of price growth. But at auction, auction properties are typically in the best suburbs, and if they're not in the best suburbs, they're often the best properties. They are the ones that are really screaming ahead at the moment. That when we have a look at clearance rates, they do continue to be high, and we're also seeing some pretty, as you said, some pretty high prices being achieved for people that are going to market.
Well, in both cities, Melbourne and Sydney, where it's really meaningful with the clearance rate, they're in the 70s. But I can sort of on the ground for us, and assure the listeners or the viewers, or both, that the clearance rate is 80+%, even 90+% in the type of properties that we're chasing. So it really is something that it's a discussion point we had, Nerida, because it's like, well, do you still buy into this market given the activity that's happening? But the answer is still typically yes, because it's there's heaps of population coming. People still want to be in these cities. They're world cities. It's not as if they're flavours of the month and they're not really going to be popular next year. They're desirable for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you have a look long term at the two cities that have achieved the strongest growth, it's been Sydney over the past 10 years, and it's been Melbourne over the past 5 years. So it's it shows that if you are looking for capital growth long term, that Melbourne and Sydney do typically provide your best bet. If you have a look in other cities, we do see surges of activity, and we've seen that most recently in both Hobart and Geelong, and they have their reasons for growing at the rate they have grown, but probably won't see continued high levels of growth, given that they are pretty small cities and lack the capacity in the same way that Melbourne and Sydney have capacity. I think the other area though that we really saw very strong growth was obviously mining towns, and Perth in particular screamed ahead for a number of years, but then pulled back a lot over the past 3 to 4 years, and so much so a lot of Perth suburbs now have lower pricing at this stage than they did a decade ago. So a lot of those gains were just wiped out with the downturn.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you touched on it a little bit before, but one of the headlines that you had recently was search is surging, but listings are still down. What's interesting is the WA trend. We kind of touched on Northern Territory and Sydney, but what's your take on the listings ratio that you're seeing in WA?
Yeah, so the city that's got the biggest imbalance between search and listings is Sydney, but number two, surprisingly, Perth. So we're actually seeing a greater imbalance between a much higher level of search compared to listings in Perth than we are seeing in Melbourne, for example. So it's quite interesting. In Perth, as I said, it has been extraordinarily weak, but if we have a look at some parts of Perth, and it is actually quite a small area of Perth that is doing really well. It's the Perth inner area, so a lot of those premium suburbs are doing really well. Rest of Perth is far less strong. So if we have a look at measures such as views per listing, if we have a look at, say, Perth, north, east, west, south, any area outside of that inner area, we're seeing around a third of the click activity on those areas compared to what we're seeing in inner Perth. So a recovery is starting, but it's not yet extending out to cheaper areas of that market.
Does your data tell who's where the IP address is? That the Perth locals having a look, or can you see the interstate activity?
Yeah, I mean we never see much Perth interstate activity. Actually, I need to have a look at it from renters, because I've got a feeling there's some jobs growth that's happening that probably would lead to quite a lot of rental activity coming from interstate. We are seeing a lot of international search, and UK search in particular is really, really strong. So I think actually UK comes after Melbourne as having Perth comes after Melbourne as having the second highest level of activity coming out of the UK. So that's interesting. It wouldn't really kick off new development, but we're also seeing quite a lot of Hong Kong and Singaporean in particular coming into the market. So there's a lot of really interesting dynamics in the Perth market at the moment, but it is a market I think people need to be quite careful about, because it does have a tendency to sort of boom and bust.
Yeah, well, that's because I'm a Perth boy. I'd love to be the ambassador for Perth and tell everyone to put their money over there. But I did notice when I grew up there was a lot of South Africans that were there, because it's a city that's close proximity to flying home, and then for the UK it's a little bit closer, so it seems to be part of that. But for the desirability. But I just know quite a few people are sort of saying, I'm keeping an eye on Perth at the moment, but it's like, for what's the bigger picture here? Because we want to make sure it's got sustainable growth. And the thing is, I've got a lot of friends over there who have got portfolios that they've been sitting on for the last 10 years, and they're kind of going, seeing all my friends over in Melbourne and Sydney doing really well, and we've suffered for a little bit. So it seems to be still a sore point for them. So it's interesting your feedback on that. Hey, you made a note that speculation is a nightmare for housing markets. At a headline level, that makes sense, but you went into a little bit of a detail around that. What for the benefit of everyone watching, why is that so?
Yeah, I guess it was a discussion I put into I do a weekly update that gets sent around to media, looking at some of the problems with housing markets. And one of the things we know is that that the buy versus rent argument, that if you've got $100,000, do you put it into a $1 million home, or do you invest in shares and rent? And because of leverage, it almost always makes sense to buy a home in cities like Melbourne and Sydney, where we do see over a long period of time we have seen sustained price growth. And the reason being is that if you buy a $1 million home, you're paying it off. So you are paying it off over time. So you are making payments every month. But if you decide to sell and you've had, say, a 60% uplift over a 5-year time period, your $100,000 investment into a $1 million property could lead to a much higher gain, because the value of your asset's gone from $1 million to $1.6 million. So, if someone is equivalently spending money on rent every week, and put that $100,000 into shares, even if the shares that $100,000 worth of shares goes up by the same amount, the amount that you take out if you decide to sell those shares is significantly less from what you would achieve from buying a home in a high growth area.
It makes sense. It's kind of the reason that we use as a principle to say why property is such a great vehicle, is because of the very thing that you talked about, right? But in the context of it being problematic for our housing markets, I certainly agree. And when you got money so cheap, it's perpetuating the fact that people feel confident, and not only that, they also feel confident to say, well, when interest rates are a bit higher, I'll actually sell my house first, so I feel comfortable about that, and then I'll buy something later. Whereas people are looking in the market going, not confident I can actually buy something yet, so I'll actually buy first and sell second, and it's sort of making that self-fulfilling challenge around listings, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we know that one of the biggest problems with listings at the moment is the fact that the market, does seem to be heating up, and things are getting a lot better. But the other issue is that if you want to sell now, there's really not much on the market to buy. So it's really it's a bit of a circular. It's not big. It is a circular problem for people at the moment.
Hey, yeah, we talked about, well, not specifically, but money is cheap, right? Interest rates are very, very low. Will we ever see interest rates high again? Will we ever go back to our teenage years where they were part of the recession we had to have and they were up in the high teens? Is that ever a likelihood, Nerida?
Look, it's not likely, and the reason being is that when we have a look at long-term interest rates, we can see that the periods in which we have had high interest rates is when there hasn't been much savings in the economy. And the most recent time was when the baby boomers started entering the workforce. So if you have a look back to the 70s and 80s, they came out of their education, they started working. As they started working, they wanted to buy homes, and as a result, the demand for money went up significantly, and we did see this blowout in interest rates, which, got up to 17-18% in many cases. If we have a look now, we do have an ageing population. We've got more money in the system than we've ever had before. We've also got a change in the distribution of wealth. So that also makes a difference. If we've got more money in fewer people's hands, then that also leads to more savings in the economy. So at this stage, it seems very unlikely we'll see interest rates rise again. I have no doubt that at some stage the economy will be strong enough for them to rise again. But to get back to double digit, we would need to see that massive increase in the number of young people, or a massive increase in population. And at this stage, at a global level, we're just not going to see that.
I always liken the baby boomers to a basketball moving through a garden hose. So, because if you actually have a look at the generation after the baby boomers, Gen X, there's actually, depending on your definition, there's actually more X, you and me, Generation X, than there are baby boomers. But the reason the baby boomers made such a significant splash is because compared to the generation before them, it was just this enormous change. So hence the basketball moving through the garden hose. And so that's kind of illustrating your point, isn't it? The fact that there was so many people making big changes from the previous generation, that's what caused the rates to go up. But you're saying it's been more stable in terms of moving through the generation types, that you're not really getting those conditions happening again. And what you just said then is, unless we get another basketball moving through the garden hose, it's not likely to jump up that high.
Yeah, that is a good analogy.
Thank you. You also wrote, and I think it's reasonably well documented, but you've seen it anecdotally. So we've had it as a discussion point. But on your site, there's a very strong link between the election back in May and the buyer leads coming through. Can you embellish that a little for us?
Yeah, so we do track, we track lots of things. I mean, we track clicks, and we track email inquiry, and email inquiry is a very good gauge of what's happening. That, on one hand, we know that people are on our site on realestate.com.au just sort of clicking around and having a look at their neighbours' homes, but on the other hand, we also know that once someone is motivated enough to click through to make an email inquiry about a property, that they're obviously, but they are more likely to be interested in buying the property. And so what we've seen with email inquiries is that we did see a pick-up in May. So in May we saw a significant impact, particularly on first home buyers, which was interesting. We saw quite a surge of activity from about May to September on first home buyers, but also owner-occupiers, a little bit on investors. But over the last month, what's really apparent is a very strong surge in interest from owner-occupiers. So again, when we have a look at all the data that we're looking at on the market at the moment, we look at high clearance rates, we look at the homes that, when we have a look at price growth, when we have a look at what we're seeing in inquiries, it's all telling quite a consistent story that top end of market is doing really well. We're starting to see it flow through to cheaper suburbs, but where the struggling areas still are those areas that appeal to investors, and particularly apartment markets are still struggling quite a lot.
Absolutely, and you talk a lot. We've chatted both on and off air around the wages growth and unemployment. That's a key factor, isn't it, in terms of it's just remaining flat, and probably more to the point, underemployment of resources that are in the marketplace, which is kind of disguising the unemployment rate to a certain extent, right?
Yeah, so we saw that creeping up on the unemployment rate, which was worrying. I mean, we've had 3 interest rate cuts, we've had tax cuts. There's been a lot of stimulus that's been put into the market to try and address the fact the economy is growing. But on the other hand, we saw this, this slight rise in unemployment. So unemployment has risen a little bit, but it's still very low. So I do think you need to keep that in mind. But the other issue that we're seeing is very low wages growth. So tracking back 30 years, we are actually seeing the lowest wages growth we've seen in a 30-year time period, and it is hitting most sectors. I think there was only a few sectors which actually have seen a bit more of an acceleration of wages, and it did seem to be focused more on, say, the healthcare sector, which, as we know, with an ageing population, we are spending more and more money on healthcare, and demand for those services continue to increase. The area that was really struggling was construction employment, and that will be bad next year as well, because we know the pipeline of construction, and we know that when we have a look at the level of activity, it will be down. 2021 may pick up, when we have a look at some data on, there's a few bits of data, particularly on, say, overseas interest in off the plan. We may start to see a pick up in approvals next year, particularly, and if that happens in Sydney and Melbourne, I think those construction wage, that flattening of construction wages should start to turn around.
Yeah, and a huge employer of labour. So the property recovery is probably good news for those folks. Any good news for shopping centres? I'm sure they'll all be excited about the increased traffic in the lead up to Christmas. But what's your views on shopping centres as a sector?
Look, it's so tough for shopping centre and retail owners at the moment, and retailers. It's been a structural shift in the market. I mean, it has been because we have had a lot more people shifting online. So, that's a change that doesn't appear to be turning around. And if anything, more, we are doing more of our shopping online than we ever have done before. Yeah. We've got those low retail trade figures that keep coming through. And again, that's something that should have turned around with those interest rate cuts and with those tax breaks that just don't seem to be flowing through to spending levels. So they're both really big problems that at this stage don't seem to be getting resolved, and just it makes it really, really bad news for traffic flows into retail precincts and subsequently spending.
How can they respond? I know you put some examples here, where some of the larger format retailers are going to smaller formats. Is it a case of delaying the inevitable, or is there an opportunity? You see a strategic opportunity for the smarter ones to make sure that they can, because there's still the whole experience side of it, isn't it? I mean, if you go to a big store like IKEA, you can't really do that online. You have to walk through the 1,000 mazes that is IKEA. So Nescafe, Apple, they're all really focused on the experience as you walk through. So that I'm sure they're not all going to go down without a fight.
No, you're right. They won't. And I suppose, if anyone with young children would know how much time you end up spending in shopping centres. So, it is something that most weekends, most of us are there at some stage. But, I think it's been interesting to see how retailers are adapting. I mean, we're seeing a lot of large format retailers moving to smaller formats. So IKEA is an interesting one that they have started to put in smaller format stores into regional shopping centres, for example. So, it can be quite hard to get to an IKEA. There's not many of them, but if they can do smaller stores, they can expand their audience a little bit more easily. We're seeing one area that does seem to be growing are places that have had high levels of apartment development, and not just, and then that doesn't just create demand for cafes and restaurants, but things like supermarkets are also needed in these high density areas, and we are seeing a change in the shape of how supermarkets are developed. So they're moving from being a big 3,000 square metre box to now we're starting to see multi-level supermarkets. So that's another trend. And then just the focus on health and wellness is another one. So, more things like gyms and medical centres and dental clinics, they're increasingly going to be moved into shopping centres. And again, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the issue for shopping centre owners is that they don't necessarily pay as much rent as a specialty, but on the other hand, they do create traffic and it's good for the consumer. I mean, it's very easy to park at a shopping centre and just dash into your dentist or your local doctor.
That's until Jeff Bezos gets his ways and he delivers everything via a drone, and we
dental services.
We only need it for the gym anyway. Hey, digital banks. That's an interesting one with open banking. It's something we've been exploring within our own business to see that transfer of information. Can you explain the 101 of digital banks and you gave some commentary around how that may or may not affect the home loan market?
Yeah, so open banking is basically where you can easily transfer all your financial records from one bank or your financial service provider to another. So it has been introduced in Australia. It's still in trial stage. It will be next year that we start to see the full impacts of open banking coming into the Australian economy. It's been running in the UK for a long time, or not for a long time, but for a bit longer. And one of the side impacts of it is that they have seen the rise of digital banks in the UK, and we are starting to see a lot of digital banks enter the Australian economy. So they're interesting that they don't offer a bricks and mortar experience. So you can't walk into a digital bank, but what they aim to provide is a better app experience and a better tracking experience. So because they're new to the market, they're digital first, they are able to quickly move into creating a much better experience, they hope, compared to what existing banks have been able to offer.
It's hard to think of a life beyond a bank, but it's not until we've done some reading into and some observations around what's happening in the UK and in Europe in general, but even over in Africa, the banking system isn't strong there, right? It's usually on their phone, and they transfer the money just using their phone, and the idea of having a branch network is totally foreign to them. So for us that have grown up in the shadows of the big four-pillar banks and can't imagine anything other than having them dominate the space, there is precedent if you look elsewhere to see that this is a reality, and the fact that people want to have transparency of their information so that they can transfer banks comfortably is a reality. It's going to happen. The question is, it's a bit like a property manager. Even though you complain about your property manager and you tell how terrible service is, and you say, well, here's a solution, why don't you change it? Oh, can't get around to changing. Like, don't you know how busy I am? And so the question is whether people will actually change banks.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, even though what's been happening with the banks, I mean, particularly Westpac at the moment and NAB, there's been a lot of, things that have happened that you would have thought would have dented confidence a lot more, but we are incredibly loyal to our big four, and we can see it. When we have a look at the home loans and where people choose to have their home loans, there's still a flight to the bigger banks. So it will be interesting to see how these digital banks go in the Australian economy. It will be into the home loan market. Will be interesting too. If we have a look at what happened in the UK, it did kickstart a pricing war, and it did lead to much lower interest rates for consumers. So from that perspective, it was a positive for many consumers, but it will be interesting to see if that happens here.
Yeah, that horse has bolted. We've already got very low interest rates. So, hey, the last one, Toorak is the most desirable suburb, as we sort of almost flick over to the listings. That'll come as a dent to the New South Welsh men and women who are listening to this. That Toorak's the most desirable.
Yeah, we had a look at the suburbs that have over $3 million median and what their views per listing were, and Toorak actually came out on top. So it was Toorak followed by, I think, Bronte was coming in at number two. So Toorak topped the list, and then all the rest was Sydney. But it's certainly very interesting that it was a Melbourne suburb, not a Sydney suburb.
Yeah, two very distinctly different suburbs too, aren't they, in terms of land size for Toorak versus Bronte, but I think
Yes.
my own favourite I think would be Bronte out of those two. But what does that matter anyway? Hey, I'm just quickly flicking over here to the most clicked on listings in different categories. This one here in Wamberal is acreage in off the Central Coast. But you've got sort of 1 hectare here, which is a lot of real estate there, or a lot of property. But I think the real feature, I'm just giving a little sneak peek there, but wait till you get to see this resort-style living that is on offer in this property that's got that beautiful Hamptons-inspired colour scheme. When you get inside, you've got the beautiful period features. Again, Hampton-inspired here. But now, I'd like to know, as you sort of go towards Christmas and the New Year, if you could see yourself sitting out on this deck and relaxing in this swimming pool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful property, isn't it? It's actually people could commute from this distance to Sydney. I mean, it wouldn't be an easy commute, but it's not too far for Sydney people. But certainly a beautiful property.
Yeah, if you're Monday to Friday, it might be a stretch, but if you've got an opportunity to work from home a couple of days a week, that might actually suit. And as we pivot over to the most clicked on auction listing for the week in Castle Cove, just to build a bit of context here for the folks playing along at home. That's just really in the northern section of Sydney, sort of almost immediately inland from the northern beaches there. But this one here is just, again, price on request. So I'm sure that it's appeared in more searches as a result of that. But again, really nice property here, presents really well. I think as I look through this, I see it's a nice plot of land, beautiful home. Someone's obviously put a lot of time and energy and attention into this, but I think largely that price on request might have meant that it appeared in a few extra searches. Nerida.
Yeah, look, I think so. I mean, I don't think it would be a property that would be affordable for most people. Like, as you said, there's no price on it anyway, but it's a great location and a beautiful home and an enormous block. I mean, it's over 1,000 square metres, so it's certainly a lot of land there.
A lot of land, and for those people who love a little daydream about the Gold Coast, check this one out, 6.25 million. I'll build some context of where it is. There you go, in Paradise Point or Paradise Waters, with those beautiful canals there. But let's all just take a moment to dream build around, or this might be your holiday home, Nerida, but for the rest of us, we'll just dream build around this beautiful property here on the Gold Coast. Be pretty nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's completely over the top, isn't it? Everything is quite amazing, very very large and very opulent.
Yes, and yeah, pretty close to the action, and that little spot for those people who don't know the Gold Coast, you're so close to the action, but you're also still remarkably private, given that you're not off the main highway and you don't get all the tourist traffic. So there's a fair bit to like about that property. And then the final one is the most clicked on rental, which is this one in Thornbury. And if you have a look, it's just a modest. It's on the west side of St George's Road for those who know Thornbury. Lots of period features, but the reason from my perspective here, Nerida, and is it $700 a week for a 3-bedder? That's actually pretty low for this area. So I think that for price alone is the reason that someone might be clicking on this one.
Yeah, Thornbury is expensive and it is an affordable property. We often see, always we see a very well-priced rental being the most clicked. So it isn't often we see a very opulent rental.
No.
So it's pretty consistent with what we see week to week.
Makes sense, doesn't it? Rental's all about price point, and buying is all about a little bit of dream building in some cases, and for some lucky folk they could think about buying that sort of stuff on the Gold Coast. But hey, it's always a pleasure to have you each and every month, Nerida. You give so generously of your time. I appreciate that. A lot of insight and a lot of intellectual horsepower goes into all of the updates that you give throughout the month. So we at the Property Couch appreciate you each and every month, and our listeners and our viewers get to benefit from your insight. So I miss you here in the studio. You're always welcome, but I appreciate that you parted your diary to chat to us via the net today.
Thanks for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. We'll see you next month. And folks, don't forget we have an episode of The Property Couch each and every week. The latest one will come out this Thursday at 3 p.m. Check it out at thepropertycouch.com.au.